I'm Marlene Whitaker, Shelter's 73 years old, and when I opened my eyes that morning, all I could see was the pale glow of fluorescent light. The ceiling above me was white and motionless, and the air smelled like bleach and something faintly metallic. I remembered the way the kitchen floor had come rushing toward me when I fell, reaching for the tea jar on the top shelf. I remembered the way my chest clenched so tight I thought it might never release, and how the tiles felt cold against my cheek. Everything after that was just noise, lights, sirens, voices, the sound of the kettle still hissing on the stove. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to lean on a neighbor. When no one else showed up, the room they put me in had 4 beds, but only one was occupied. When I woke up, an older woman curled toward the wall, breathing steadily. I didn't know her name, but I was glad for the quiet at home in my place out in Avondale. It had been quiet too, but the kind you grow into, not the kind that smells like antiseptic and murmured charts. I'd lived there alone ever since. Frank passed 10 years back. We'd been married 42 years, had 1 daughter together, built a life full of routines and hand-me-down kindness. I never expected to end up in a hospital gown with a needle in my arm and my heart trying to decide whether it wanted to stay. I was trying to sit up when the door opened, soft and slow, and I heard footsteps. I knew before I saw her, quick and uneven, like she was always running late, even when she wasn't Mom. Her voice was careful, like she didn't want to wake the whole room. "You awake?" I turned my head just a little, and there she was, Carolyn, standing in the doorway with a bunch of gladiolus wrapped in green paper. Gladiolus of all things, she knew. I never liked them. I'd always preferred daisies or those little blue cornflowers. But I suppose she forgot, or never remembered. I nodded and tried to smile. My mouth felt dry and my voice didn't come out right. "Thank you, honey. You didn't have to come." She came in and sat down beside me. Her suit looked slept and her hair was loose in the back like she'd left in a rush. I hadn't seen her since her birthday, 3 months back, when I'd brought a cake to her apartment and left with most of it still in the box. She asked how I was feeling, but her eyes kept drifting toward the blue folder on the nightstand. I watched her study it like it was a contract she needed to memorize. The doctor said it was a small heart episode. I said nothing serious, just some rest and medicine. She nodded, but I wasn't sure she heard me. Not really. When Dr. Horowitz came in later that evening, she stood straight and smiled big and stuck out her hand. "I'm her daughter, Carolyn Whitaker," she said, like she was applying for a job. The doctor was kind. He reminded me of Frank in the eyes, and the way he didn't rush. "Your mom's condition is stable," he said. "Mild heart failure, but manageable. We'll keep her here for observation, a few more days, standard protocol." "What about the medication?" Carolyn asked. "Are you sure the dose is strong enough? I've read sometimes older patients need more aggressive treatment." Dr. Horowitz raised his eyebrows. "We typically lower the dosage in seniors to avoid complications. But so far, your mom's responding?" "Well, no reason to change anything yet." Carolyn nodded, but her fingers tightened around the strap of that fancy leather handbag. She'd brought a new one by the look of it, and not cheap either. I wondered briefly how she'd afforded it after everything she'd told me about money being tight since the divorce. After he left the room, she reached for my hand. Her palm felt cold and damp. "You know, I just want what's best for you, right?" she said. I said nothing, but something in her voice stayed with me long after she left, a note of insistence, a kind of hunger that didn't sound like worry. The next morning, after rounds, I took a slow walk down the hallway just to stretch my legs near the window. At the end of the corridor, I overheard her again through a partially open office door talking to the doctor. "She's in more pain than she lets on," she said. "I heard her crying last night. I hadn't cried at all. Not from pain, anyway." I stood there for a long time, not sure what to think of the daughter I had raised to be kind, respectful. Someone who sent thank you notes without being told. And now here she was, telling stories to my doctor, ones that didn't match the truth. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the soft hum of machines and the ticking of the wall clock. And I thought, what exactly is she trying to do? And why does it feel like something isn't right? Carolyn came back the next morning before breakfast, earlier than she ever used to show up for anything. She was wearing the same gray blazer from the day before, though this time her blouse looked freshly pressed. She had a bag with her, the canvas kind she usually used for weekend errands, and when she sat down by my bed, she pulled out a thermos and 2 small sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. "I brought coffee," she said, unscrewing the lid. "Thought you'd want something better than the hospital stuff?" It smelled good, warm, and familiar. She poured a little into one of the plastic cups the nurses leave for water and handed it to me, watching carefully as I took a sip. I thanked her, and she smiled like she'd done something grand. "You don't have to stay long, honey," I said, setting the cup down. "I'm doing fine. You should get to work." "I took the day off," she said, folding the wax paper back over her sandwich. "I want to stay with you today. Keep an eye on things." That was the first time she said it like that. Keep an eye on things, like she needed to supervise something. At 9, the nurse came in with my morning medication and a tray of eggs and toast. There were more pills this time than before, a few larger than I remembered. I glanced at Carolyn, unsure whether I'd be able to make the switch with her sitting right there watching. She leaned in and counted them as I held the cup. "There's one more today," she noted quietly. "I thought so." She pulled out a notebook from her bag, the spiral kind with ruled pages, and started jotting something down. "What are you writing?" I asked. "I'm tracking your symptoms," she said. "What time you take the medication, what it includes, how you feel after. It'll help the doctor adjust if needed." I nodded, but something in my chest felt tight that had nothing to do with the heart episode. She was treating me like a patient, not a mother. Every time I swallowed a pill, she wrote the time. Every time I shifted in bed, she asked how I was feeling. I told her I was just a little dizzy, and she nodded, wrote it down like it was a data point on a graph. When Dr. Horowitz came in around 10 with his clipboard and the same tired smile, Carolyn was on her feet before he spoke. "I took the day off," she said, "to observe how the new dosage is affecting my mother. I want to be sure we're doing everything we can." The doctor raised his eyebrows, but nodded politely. "And how are you feeling this morning, Mrs. Whitaker?" "My heart's beating faster than usual," I said, "and I feel a little lightheaded." "That can happen with a dosage adjustment," he said, checking my pulse. "Her pressure's a little elevated, but not dangerously so. Let's keep monitoring. If there's anything unusual, press the call button." "Will it get worse before it gets better?" Carolyn asked, her voice a little sharper than before. "Shouldn't we be concerned that she's already experiencing dizziness?" The doctor glanced between us. "Everyone reacts differently. This isn't unexpected, but I wouldn't increase anything beyond this point without clear medical cause." Carolyn didn't argue, but I saw the way she gripped the notebook tight, her lips pressed into a thin line. After he left, she wrote more, checked her watch, and asked again if the dizziness had improved. I told her it had a little, which wasn't true, but I didn't know what she wanted to hear. I just knew I needed to be careful. By lunchtime, I was feeling worse. My heartbeat had become uneven, and every time I moved, the dizziness rushed back. The nurse came in with the next round of pills, but this time I told Carolyn I felt nauseous and needed to step into the restroom before I took anything. She nodded and offered to help me walk, but I waved her off. Inside the bathroom, I closed the door, took the real pills out of the cup, and flushed them. Then I pulled the little pouch from Brit out of my robe pocket and dropped the matching vitamins into the empty cup. When I came back, I took them in front of Carolyn and returned to bed. "How do you feel now?" she asked, pen in hand. "The nausea passed," I said. "I think I needed to move around a bit." She wrote that down too, but this time her expression flickered just for a second. "Confusion, maybe. Or disappointment," As the afternoon wore on, I actually did start to feel better. No more irregular heartbeat. No dizziness. The nurses noticed too, glancing at my chart with surprise and murmuring that my pressure was stabilizing. Carolyn, on the other hand, became more unsettled. She kept asking about symptoms that weren't there. "Are you sure your chest isn't tight?" she asked at 2:00. "You seemed flushed earlier." "I'm fine now," I said, "but maybe you're just not noticing." "It could be cumulative," she said, flipping back a few pages in her notebook. "We should give it more time." She started pacing the room, getting up every few minutes to peer out the window, then sitting back down and rubbing her temples. By late afternoon, she looked exhausted. Pale, hunched eyes shadowed like she hadn't slept in days. "My head's killing me," she muttered, pulling a hair tie from her wrist and redoing her ponytail. "It's probably just stress." "You want Tylenol?" I asked. "I didn't bring anything," she said, pressing her fingers to her forehead. I looked over at the evening medication tray still sitting untouched on my nightstand. The nurse had dropped it off before dinner, same routine as always. A fresh dose of everything, including 2 of the larger white pills the doctor had added. "You know," I said slowly, "they gave me something for chest pain. It strong works fast. You could try one." She turned toward me, unsure. "I don't know if it's safe for me." "It's just one," I said. "If it works for me, it'll help you." I walked to the nightstand, took one of the large pills from the cup, and handed it to her. "This one's the strongest. You'll feel better in 20 minutes. She stared at it a moment, then shrugged, popped it in her mouth, and swallowed it with a sip from my water glass. "Thanks, Mom," she said, sitting back down. "Hopefully this does something." I nodded and went back to my book. She stayed quiet for a while, breathing slow, rubbing the back of her neck. A little after 5, she whispered, "I think my headache's better, but my heart feels strange." "It's probably the stress," I said softly. "You've been tense all day." She nodded, but she didn't look convinced. She leaned back, breathing shallow, and I watched her eyes move across the room, unfocused. 20 more minutes passed, and I saw her hands begin to tremble. She pressed her fingers to her chest, then shifted in the chair, like she couldn't get comfortable. "Mom," she said again, voice low. "My heart feels weird, like it's skipping." "You should go home, honey," I said. "You've been here all day. You need rest." "I don't feel right," she whispered. "It's getting worse." I reached over and pressed the call button. When the nurse arrived, Carolyn was gripping the arms of the chair, her lips pale and skin damp with sweat. "She doesn't feel well," I said. "She's having heart palpitations." The nurse checked her pulse, then moved quickly. "This is arrhythmia," she said. "We need to transfer her to cardiology now." Carolyn tried to speak, but her breath came too fast. Within minutes, a stretcher arrived, and she was wheeled out of the room. Her body stiff and trembling eyes wide with fear. The door closed behind them, and the room fell quiet. I sat in bed, watching the lights in the hallway flicker against the walls, waiting for someone to come back and explain what had just happened. But I already knew. They wheeled Carolyn out so fast, I barely had time to gather what was happening. One moment, she was in the chair, clutching her chest, and the next, the hallway filled with nurses and a portable monitor. The last thing I saw was her face, pale and confused, before the stretcher disappeared around the corner. The door eased shut behind them, and for a long while, the only sound in the room was the faint buzz of the overhead light. Dinner came an hour later, along with the evening round of medication. The nurse smiled as she set the cup on the tray beside my bed, same as always, pills sorted by color. A little cup of water, a clipboard under her arm. "Let me know if you need anything," she said. I nodded and waited until she left the room. My roommate was still asleep, soft breathing rising and falling. I reached for the cup, opened the drawer of my nightstand, and took out the envelope. The real pills went inside. The vitamins Britt had given me, white, yellow, and blue, went back into the cup. The motion was second nature now. Calm, careful. Done before the hum of the nurse's shoes faded down the hall. Outside, the sky had turned deep gray. Rain tapped against the windows in a soft, steady rhythm. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang, then stopped. The quiet was deeper that night, different than before. The next morning, the nurses were quieter too. No one mentioned Carolyn, not directly. A few asked how I was feeling, made notes about my blood pressure, and glanced at each other when I said I was sleeping better. Dr. Horowitz stopped in briefly during his rounds, pressed his stethoscope to my chest, nodded at the chart. "You're improving," he said. "Let's keep monitoring." I asked about my daughter. He hesitated, then said, "She's stable. We're doing everything we can." That was all. Later that afternoon, Britt came by just like she promised she would. She wore her raincoat open, a knitted scarf around her neck, and a large wicker basket hooked over her arm. The nurses lit up when they saw her. She still knew half of them by name. "Cabbage pies," she whispered, setting the basket on my tray table. "Still warm. You used to say they were better than the ones at the diner." She pulled a chair close and sat down, folding her hands in her lap. "How are you?" "I'm all right," I said. "Carolyn's not." Britt nodded slowly. "I heard." The nurse at the desk didn't say much, but I saw the look on her face. I told her everything that had happened since the day before. The pill, the timing, the way Carolyn had looked at me just before she collapsed. Britt didn't interrupt. She just sat there listening. When I finished, she reached into the basket and pulled out a second pouch of vitamins. "You'll need these," she said, "if they've increased your dosage again." I opened the evening medication tray to check. More pills. 2 of the larger ones, now both identical to the one I'd handed Carolyn. I switched them out carefully, tucked the real ones away, and folded the envelope shut. "Do they watch you take them?" Britt asked. "Sometimes," I said. "Not always. You're doing the right thing," she said gently. "Just until we know more." That night passed quietly. No calls. No visits. The next morning, when the nurse brought my breakfast, she lingered a little longer than usual. "Your vitals look good today," she said. "You're responding well." I smiled and thanked her, then watched her leave with the chart tucked under her arm. I sat back in bed, chewing slowly, and tried to feel whatever it was I was supposed to feel. Relief, maybe, or fear, but nothing settled. By the end of the second day, the questions had started. Not from the staff, they still acted as if everything was unfolding as expected, but in glances, pauses in conversation, the faint rustle of whispered theories outside the door. A nurse leaned in once and said, "Funny thing, some patients react better to medicine than we predict. Maybe you're one of the lucky ones." I didn't answer, just nodded and went back to sipping my tea. The third day brought a change. Dr. Horowitz arrived later than usual, no students in tow. His hair was mussed, and he looked tired. He carried a thicker folder this time, one with test results clipped together and notes scribbled in the margins. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, pulling the chair beside my bed. "We need to talk about your daughter." I set my book aside and folded my hands. "Go ahead." "She's recovering," he said, her heart rhythms stabilizing. "We've managed the arrhythmia, and the immediate danger has passed." I waited, but he continued flipping open the folder. Her toxicology results came back. And frankly, they don't make sense. He turned the paper toward me, pointing at the numbers. There's a substance in her system, dioxin. It's a potent heart medication. We prescribe it to patients with advanced cardiac conditions, typically the elderly. The levels in your daughter's blood were 5 times above therapeutic range. In someone her age, without pre-existing heart conditions, that amount could be fatal. I stayed still, my face calm, watching him read. She doesn't have a prescription, he added, and we don't give it to anyone under 40 without a full cardiac workup. I didn't know she had anything like that in her system, I said slowly. She may have taken yours by mistake, he said. That's the only theory we can come up with. Do you recall anything unusual that day? I kept my expression neutral, let the silence stretch just long enough. Then I nodded, as if something came back to me. She had a headache, I said, that evening. She'd been with me all day taking notes, asking questions. Around dinner time, she said it was unbearable. I didn't have anything but what the nurse brought, so I gave her one of mine. Dr. Horowitz nodded, taking notes. I told her it was strong, I said, but I didn't think one would hurt. He looked up. That explains a lot. The dosage you're on is high for someone your age, but it's appropriate. For her, even one pill would have caused a reaction. He closed the folder and set it on his lap. It wasn't your fault, Mrs. Whitaker. You did what anyone would have done. But please, be cautious. These medications aren't like aspirin. Even a small mix-up can be dangerous. I understand, I said. He folded the folder under his arm and gave me a small, reassuring smile. You're doing remarkably well. If things continue like this, we'll talk about discharge soon. I watched him leave, then turned back toward the window. The sky was overcast again, low clouds stretched thin above the trees. An orderly in rubber boots was sweeping leaves into a pile near the courtyard bench. Somewhere in this same hospital, my daughter lay in a recovery bed, wrapped in quiet machines and IV lines. Whatever she had planned, it had turned against her. And no one, not the nurses, not the doctors, not the other patients, suspected a thing. Dr. Horowitz discharged me 4 days after Carolyn was moved to recovery. He said my response to treatment was better than expected. I nodded, thanked him for his care, took the envelope with the prescription, and folded it into my purse, already knowing I'd throw it out as soon as I got home. I'd spent the past week taking nothing but Brit's vitamins, and somehow I'd gotten stronger. My heartbeat, steady blood pressure back to normal color back in my face. The nurses called it remarkable. Dr. Horowitz called it fortunate. No one asked why Carolyn had nearly collapsed. No one asked why I had healed faster than most. Brit came to pick me up in her old Ford sedan. She waited just outside the hospital doors with a scarf tied around her hair and a grocery bag full of apples in the front seat. On the ride home, she asked if anyone had followed up on the toxicology report. I told her the doctor believed I'd given Carolyn the pill by mistake, that it was officially recorded as an accident. Brit didn't say much. She just turned the corner onto Elm Street and nodded slowly, eyes on the road. The house was colder than I remembered. The windows had stayed shut while I was gone, and the air was still. I turned on the heat, opened the curtains in the living room, and listened as the radiators creaked back to life. Mail was piled up on the side table near the door, a mix of bills, catalogs, and a brightly colored flyer from a funeral home offering discounted pre-planning. I tossed it into the bin without a second thought. I spent that first afternoon back wiping down the countertops, throwing out spoiled food, and watering the thirsty potted plants in the kitchen window. The quiet felt different than the hospital's quiet, less sterile, more rooted. By evening, I'd lit a candle on the table and made myself a simple dinner of soup and toast. I didn't turn the TV on. I just sat there listening to the wind against the siding, the tick of the clock in the hallway, the steady hum of a house settling into night. Carolyn didn't call until 3 days later. The phone rang just before bedtime, the kind of ring that makes you pause hands still on the light switch. "Mom, it's me," she said. Her voice was thinner than usual, like she'd been walking uphill. "I'm home now." "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Better. Slowly. I'm still supposed to rest. No heavy lifting, no stress." She paused, then added, "I need to talk to you. About what happened." I said she could come by the next day. That afternoon, I watched from the living room window as she made her way up the walk. She moved slowly, one hand brushing against the wooden fence for balance. Her coat hung loose on her frame, and there were shadows under her eyes I hadn't seen in years. I opened the door but didn't help her inside. She stepped past me into the kitchen and sat down at the old oak table where she used to do her homework. I poured tea and set a cup in front of her, then sat across from her without saying much. The wind outside pushed leaves against the porch steps. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and fell silent. I remember everything Carolyn said quietly. "The day I got sick, I remember sitting here writing everything down, tracking your reactions, the medication times, your pulse, how you said you felt dizzy. I was watching you every minute." I didn't interrupt. She held the cup with both hands, eyes fixed on the steam. "I had such a headache by the end of that day," she continued. "You offered me something for the pain. I didn't think twice. I took it." She looked up, meeting my eyes. Later, the doctor told me what it was. He said that amount of dioxin could kill a healthy person. "I didn't know it would hurt you," I said calmly. "You said your head was splitting. I thought one of my pills might help." She set the cup down carefully. "Did you hear me talking to Dr. Horowitz before that? When I asked him to raise your dosage?" I nodded. "So you knew," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "You knew what I was trying to do." "I understood enough," I said. "Your questions, the pressure on the doctor, the things you said I never said. It added up." She looked down at her lap and was quiet for a while. The clock in the dining room chimed the half-hour. "What did you do when you figured it out?" she asked. "I called Britt," I said. "She helped me switch the pills. Vitamins same size and color. I never took the ones you pushed the doctor to increase. And the one you gave me," she asked slowly, "that wasn't a mistake, was it?" "No," I said. "It was the exact pill you tried to get me to take. Same dose, same intention." Carolyn stood slowly and walked to the window, one hand on the sill. Her movements were stiff, measured. The after effects of what she'd taken still lingered in the way she carried herself. "I could have died," she said, without turning around. "You could have," I answered. "But you didn't. And if your plan had worked, I wouldn't be here now." She stayed at the window for a long time. When she finally turned back, her face was pale but composed. "What happens now?" she asked. "Do we just stop being family?" "We live our own lives," I said. "Separate. And the house." Her voice cracked slightly. "Will you change your will?" "I already did," I said. "The house is going to the city's animal shelter. They need the land for a new facility." Her mouth opened, then closed. She stepped back, steadying herself on the table edge. "This is the house I grew up in," she said. "It's part of me. It's mine," I replied, "and I have the right to choose where it goes." She didn't argue. She just walked to the door, opened it, and paused on the threshold. "Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Carolyn." I closed the door behind her and turned the lock. Her footsteps faded down the path, and then the gate clicked shut. I walked back to the kitchen, cleared the cups, rinsed them in the sink, and stood for a moment at the window, watching the bare trees sway in the wind. Outside, the rain had started again. soft at first, then steady. It tapped gently against the glass, as if nothing had changed at all. The phone calls stopped after that. No more updates, no check-ins, no just seeing how you're doing voicemails. For the first time since the hospital, I had the house to myself without interruption. I filled the quiet with small, steady things, organizing the linen closet, sorting old photographs, boiling broth in the evenings, and freezing it in glass jars for winter. Britt stopped by once or twice a week with groceries or mail I'd forgotten to forward. She never brought up Carolyn unless I did, and even then she kept her words measured. I saw her outside the co-op Britt mentioned one Thursday, setting a bunch of kale on the counter. She didn't see me, looked like she'd lost some weight. I nodded and set the kettle on the stove. She looked nervous, Britt added after a moment. Kept checking over her shoulder like someone might recognize her. She always did hate the idea of anyone seeing her less than perfect, I said, quietly. Later that afternoon, I pulled the box of medical records from the hall closet. It had been years since I'd opened it. Thick manila folders, old scans, a few handwritten notes from Dr. Stern, back when he was still practicing in town. I found the test results from my last 3 appointments before the hospital stay. My levels had been fine. Nothing dangerous. Nothing that justified what Carolyn had told the doctor. I made copies of the most recent one, the one dated just 4 weeks before she took me in. Then I opened the envelope with the discharge summary, carefully scanned the printout Dr. Horowitz had given me. In it, there was no mention of Carolyn's influence. No record of her requesting changes to my medication, though I remembered every word of that conversation. Friday morning, I drove to the pharmacy. I asked to speak with someone about my prescription history and requested a printout of the last 6 months. The pharmacist, a soft-spoken man in his 40s, typed in my name and printed a page from behind the counter. "Looks like you've had 4 dosage adjustments since July," he said. "Mostly increases." "Was that something my doctor ordered?" I asked. He checked the screen again. "Looks like all of them came from an online directive through the care portal. The logins are time-stamped and the credentials are marked as authorized, but it doesn't show names. You'd have to request that from your provider." That afternoon, I sent the request to the hospital's records department. 3 days later, an envelope arrived with a list of entries under my file. 3 of the dosage requests had come from a username that didn't match my doctor. I called Britt the moment I saw it. "She used the system to log in," I said. "I don't know how she got access, but she left a digital trail." "Print everything Britt said. We need to make a plan." The following week, I scheduled an appointment with a lawyer. Not for court, not for press, just to understand my options. His office was quiet, tucked between a dental clinic and a travel agency. He wore glasses that kept slipping down his nose and asked clear, patient questions. Intent would be difficult to prove, he said, as he skimmed the documents. But digital access under false credentials, that's serious. He leaned back and tapped the desk twice. "If you wanted to pursue this, we could. But there's another way." I looked up. "You said you've already changed your will," he said, "that you removed her from any property inheritance." "I did," I said. "Then you've already taken control where it counts. What you do next depends on what you want, not just legally, but personally." I thanked him, gathered the documents into a folder, and stepped back out into the cold afternoon air. On the drive home, I passed Carolyn's old apartment building. Her name was still on the buzzer, though the mailbox below it was stuffed with unopened circulars. A blue envelope stuck halfway out, edges curled from the wind. At home, I sat at the dining table with a fresh pot of tea and laid out the documents in front of me. Carolyn's name stared back in printed lines, her digital access code, the timestamp from the hospital's portal, the dosage adjustment entries marked urgent. She had tried to control the end of my story, but somewhere between the pills and the silence, I'd started writing a different one. That evening, I called Britt. "I'm ready," I said. "For what?" "For people to know." She didn't ask if I was sure. She just said, "Tell me what you need." The next morning, we drafted the letter together. It wasn't a legal document. It wasn't a threat. Just a clear dated record of what happened from the day I was admitted to the change in medication, to the hospitalization, to Carolyn's collapse. We attached copies of the pharmacy records and the portal activity. Then we mailed it to the hospital's patient review board, with a second copy sent to Dr. Horowitz's office. The final envelope was smaller. It held a handwritten note. "Carolyn, this is the last thing you'll receive from me. What you did is now recorded and known. I'm still here. That's all that matters." "Mom." I placed a stamp in the top corner and dropped it into the box outside the post office before the sun set. By the time I got home, the porch light had flickered on. I walked into the house, hung up my coat, and folded the empty folder back into the cabinet. I didn't need the papers anymore. The weight of them was already gone. It was early spring when I got the call. The sky outside was still pale with morning haze, and the robins hadn't returned yet, but the chill had softened. I was setting out teacups for Britt and me. She was due at 10 when the phone rang. It wasn't a number I recognized. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Diane Wilcox from the hospital's ethics board. She spoke with a calm, deliberate tone, the kind people use when they've practiced what they're going to say. "I received the materials you sent," she said. "I'd like to follow up on a few details if that's all right." We talked for nearly 40 minutes. She asked careful questions about dates, names, the portal logs, the prescriptions. I didn't embellish. I simply gave her what I knew and what I could prove. When we were finished, she thanked me and promised to be in touch within 2 weeks. Britt arrived just as I was hanging up. I told her everything, and she nodded, then set the scones on the counter without a word. We didn't need to say much. The fact that someone had listened, that was enough for now. 10 days later, I got another call. This time, it wasn't the hospital. It was Carolyn. Her name lit up the screen of the kitchen phone the way it used to when she called on birthdays or holidays. I stared at it for 3 rings before picking up. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice thinner than I remembered. "Hello, Carolyn." There was a long pause on the line. I could hear traffic in the background, maybe from a parked car. Then she spoke again. "I know you sent something," she said. "To the hospital." "I did." Another pause. I think we should talk." I told her I'd be home that Friday at 3. She arrived at 4:30. She looked tired, her coat wrinkled and buttoned wrong at the collar. She didn't come inside right away, just stood on the porch like she was waiting for me to change my mind. I opened the door and stepped aside. We sat in the front room. I offered her tea and she declined. Her hands fidgeted in her lap. She didn't bring flowers this time. "I know I crossed a line," she began, her voice low. "I was scared. I thought if I could just keep everything in control." "You tried to manage my care behind my back," I said evenly. "That's not fear. That's something else." She looked down. "I didn't want to lose you. Then why did you act like I was already gone?" Her shoulders slumped. She rubbed her forehead like she had a headache coming on. "I didn't mean to make it worse," she said, "but I did." I let the silence stretch. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Inside was a letter already opened with the hospital's letterhead at the top. "They're reviewing it formally," she said. "Said they may suspend my access to the portal. There's a risk they'll report it." I nodded. "They should," I said. She blinked, then looked at me like she wasn't sure what she'd expected me to say. "You're my daughter, Carolyn," I said. "But you're not above consequences." "I know." I looked at her and saw someone I recognized, but only partly. The polish, the practiced words, the way she used to present herself in public, it had all fallen away. And underneath it, I saw someone still trying to hold a version of the truth together that no longer fit. You made a choice, I said. You thought you knew better. But I wasn't confused, and I wasn't helpless. You treated me like I didn't matter. I thought I was protecting you. You weren't. You were protecting yourself. She didn't argue. She just sat there and folded the paper back into the folder like it was too heavy to hold any longer. Will you ever forgive me? She asked. I don't know, I said quietly. That's not something I owe on demand. The wind stirred the curtains. A branch scratched the window pane. We sat like that for a few more minutes, the room holding its breath. Eventually, she stood and gathered her coat. She didn't ask for a hug. She didn't promise to call. She just said, "Thank you for letting me speak," and walked back out onto the porch. I watched her go 1 foot in front of the other down the sidewalk. She didn't look back. The next morning, an envelope arrived from the hospital board. Inside was a typed letter signed by Diane Wilcox. They had completed their internal investigation. Carolyn's access had been revoked. Her actions had been deemed an abuse of authorization. The record would remain on file should future concerns arise. I folded the letter carefully and slid it into the drawer with my medical files. It didn't fix everything, but it marked a boundary that hadn't existed before. Later that week, Britt and I walked down to the senior center for Thursday games night. The air had turned warmer. Daffodils were pushing up along the sidewalk. I didn't say much on the walk there, but Britt stayed close beside me. We played 2 rounds of cards, then split a piece of lemon cake. As we packed up, she asked if I was all right. I am, I said. Finally. She squeezed my shoulder and we headed home 1 quiet step at a time. Carolyn didn't call for nearly 2 weeks. The board's letter had gone through and her portal access had been revoked. I thought that might be the end of it, at least for a while. But on a mild Sunday afternoon in late April, I heard a knock on the door. Not the hurried knock of a visitor dropping by. A slow, measured knock 3 times, then silence. I opened it to find Carolyn standing on the porch, her hands at her sides, no purse, no folder, no coat. Just her, and the sunlight coming in behind her. I wanted to talk, she said. Not about the hospital, just us. I stepped back and let her in. We sat in the back room this time, near the window that faced the garden. The azaleas were blooming again, bright pink under the bird feeders. I offered her tea, and she accepted. No sugar, no milk, just hot and plain. She looked thinner, or maybe just older. There was a stillness to her I didn't remember from before. Like whatever held her together had finally settled. I've been thinking, she began, about what you said. About how I tried to make decisions for you because I was afraid. And how that fear made me feel entitled. I didn't speak. I just let her continue. I talked to a counselor at work, she said. They referred me to someone. I've had 2 sessions so far. I don't know if it's helping yet, but I'm going. She sipped her tea. I realized I've always tried to keep everything controlled, other people's needs, emotions, even their pain, because I didn't trust they could handle it. But the truth is, I didn't want to feel helpless. And you being sick? It scared me in ways I didn't expect. I nodded slowly. I never wanted to hurt you, Mom. I know, I said. But you did. She looked down. I lost something I didn't even realize I was risking, she said. Your trust. I watched her fingers curl around the mug, holding it steady, even as her voice wavered. You didn't just lose it, I said. You gave it away when you decided I couldn't be trusted with my own care. She blinked, but didn't argue. "I want to rebuild that trust," she said softly. "But I'll understand if you don't think that's possible." I sat back the mug, warming my hands. Outside, a cardinal darted across the garden fence. The feeder swayed gently in its wake. "I'm not ready to make promises," I said, "but I'm willing to take it one step at a time." Her eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. Instead, she set her mug down and reached into her pocket. She pulled out a slip of paper and handed it to me. It was a printed note. At the top was the name of the hospital's Patient Rights Committee. Below that, a list of new guidelines regarding family access and consent ones I hadn't seen before. "They added this after reviewing my case," she said. "It's part of a new protocol. I didn't expect them to tell me, but they did." I read the first paragraph twice. It was formal, the kind of language committees used. But in between the lines, I saw what it meant. They hadn't just punished Carolyn. They'd used what happened as a basis to prevent it from happening again. I folded the paper and placed it on the table. "That's something," I said. "It's not enough," she replied. "But it's a start." We talked for another half hour. Not about the board, or the care plan, or the medications. We talked about Britt's lemon cake and the birds nesting in the maple trees, and a memory she had from when she was 6, watching her father fix the back fence while I folded laundry on the porch. It wasn't easy. It didn't fix what was broken. But it felt like the beginning of something different. Not the old closeness. Not yet. But maybe something honest. She stood to leave just before 5. "I'll call next week," she said. "If that's all right." "It is." She stepped out into the late sun, the wind brushing her hair back from her face. She didn't look rushed or embarrassed. She looked like someone who had stopped pretending. I closed the door gently behind her. Later that evening, I took out the hospital's letter again, the one I'd tucked away beside my medical records. I read it once more, not for the outcome, but for what it had cost to get there. The silence, the risk, the decision to speak even when I knew it would upset the people closest to me. I set it back in the drawer and went to water the plants. In the kitchen, the timer chimed for the roast. The house smelled like thyme and butter. I moved slow, steady, no rush, no noise. Just the rhythm of a home that finally felt like mine again. It took time, more than I expected. The kind of time you don't measure in weeks or holidays, but in the way people begin to speak to each other again gently, without flinching. Carolyn and I didn't talk every day. Sometimes we went a week without a call. But the conversations we did have were honest, and that mattered more than frequency ever did. In early June, she asked if she could stop by and help plant the spring tomatoes. I said yes. She showed up in an old sweatshirt and garden shoes, hair tied back, a small flat of seedlings tucked under her arm. We worked side by side without much talking, digging, planting, patting down the soil. At one point, she asked if I still used the same recipe for tomato sauce. I told her I did. By the time we rinsed off the tools, the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows over the back steps. I offered her a glass of iced tea, and we sat there a while watching the bees hover around the sage blossoms. Later that week, Britt stopped by with a lemon cake wrapped in wax paper. She didn't say much either. Just handed it to me with a soft smile and said, "You'll tell me how it turned out." I knew it was her way of showing support, quiet, thoughtful, with room to breathe. I hadn't forgiven everything. I don't think forgiveness always looks like the movies. Sometimes it's not a moment, it's 100 small choices. To answer the phone, to let someone in, to let yourself feel safe in your own home again. I updated my advance directives with the hospital, listing my friend Linda as my primary contact for all decisions going forward. She had always listened, always let me speak for myself. It felt like the right kind of boundary one that didn't shut anyone out, but protected what mattered most. One afternoon in July, I was folding towels by the open window when I heard children laughing on the sidewalk. Summer heat rising in waves off the pavement, their voices bright and full of possibility. I thought of how different my life looked now from just a year ago. Not louder, not flashier, but more mine. Built gently, day by day, with people who chose to listen and let go of control. Carolyn eventually wrote me a letter. It wasn't long, just a page and a half. She said she understood now that love without respect wasn't really love at all, and that she was learning not to confuse worry with ownership. I folded it up and placed it in the drawer next to the patient rights letter. Not because I needed proof, but because I wanted to remember how far we'd both come. In the end, it wasn't about who won or lost. It was about choosing dignity when no one handed it to you. About standing up, not in anger, but in quiet certainty that your voice matters even when people try to speak over it. If you've ever had to reclaim space that was already yours, or learned how to draw a boundary with someone you love, I hope this story made you feel seen. And if it did, feel free to share it with someone who might need it too. Or leave a note in the comments. I'll be reading. Thanks for listening, truly. And take care of yourself kindly and without apology.